Welcome. Today we will be talking about the age-old question of whether you should buy or rent your own place. Since buying a house is probably one of the biggest purchases we'll ever make in our lifetime, it's really worth to consider this. Buying a house will make us feel safe, but is it financially sound? Unfortunately, the answer is a bit disappointing since with all complex topics, in this case too, it will kind of depend on you. First, let's consider the most obvious piece of the puzzle: how likely you are to move in the near future. If your job, for example, asks for you to move around a lot or you're traveling around a lot, then chances are it's probably not worth for you to buy since you wouldn't be staying around that much to use it. Unless, of course, you are completely fine and willing to act as your landlord towards your house in the meantime, and you would rent it out as an additional source of revenue. In which case, it's a completely viable solution, but do be careful because that will put additional work on your plate, which you will have to deal with. If that does not disturb you, then stay tuned. In a later video when I'll be talking about investments, I will go into this sort of opportunity where you can use your own place or buying a multitude of other apartment complexes and houses for you to rent out, and how you can make a pretty decent living out of that. Another big consideration would be your marital status. It's quite obvious that the bigger your family is, the harder it is, one, to move around without big sacrifices, two, the more security is something you should value in your life. So if you're just married, it's still okay, you can move around, but if you have a kid or two already, then probably prioritizing a more stable and grounded living situation will become advantageous for you, and that should be a big consideration, even if you do lose out somewhat. As we go into it later, buying a house is just as viable as renting most of the time, so if you do it correctly, it will probably benefit you to just stay put in that case. As the last non-economical point, let's talk about psychology a bit. Many people get really stressed out from not owning their place and having to kind of worry about whether the person they're renting from will find someone else who will pay more, or the rent will rise and they will have to find a new place if they can't pay it, or will have to just pay more and more into the current to keep up their current living standards. If you find yourself really stressing over this, then probably yet again I would look towards buying more. Stress is something we all have in our lives, and we probably all should try to reduce it as much as possible, because life is short and being stressful will only just make it shorter, so it's one more thing to consider. With that said, there are circumstances where renting becomes the more obvious option, and this is kind of where we get into money. For instance, buying a house can be extremely expensive even with a good mortgage. The down payment you will most likely have to make on a house can be a pretty decent sum in and of itself. If you don't have that, then buying is just not an option. You will have to rent then. Another one such case where renting is the obviously a good choice is when, let's say, you have a family member or an acquaintance or some friends who can rent out their place to you or a room for you for way below the market price. In that case, taking that will most likely free up plenty of your salary, which you will be able to use towards investment or just to better your life in any way. So accepting these options is almost always a good choice too. As we've went over before, you can also be someone who travels around a lot. In that case too, probably you just can't buy your own house at one place because that just can't go with you. So just renting where you stay in the city, like let's say you stay in a city for half a year, it's really not worth to buy a house or a flat for half a year. So you would just rent your place, then move on with your life. Then too, it's probably just a good solution. If, however, none of these obvious situations represent your life well, then I'm afraid you will have to buckle up because math is ahead. We will go a bit in depth on this one with a few examples. So let's start, shall we? Let's say you are looking around in an area with an average house value of around $250,000. You can either rent one or buy one. Let's consider buying first. To get a mortgage, you will need around a $50,000 down payment on these houses, so you better have that saved up already. At this stage, you can choose a loan. For this example, we will use one with an interest rate of around 4%, and as for the length, we will check one at a 15-year or a 13-year period. We will check both to compare which is a better value for you. Let's start with the 15-year variant, which would cost you around $1,700 every month. As for the 30-year, it would cost you around $1,200. Personally, I would not pick up a mortgage that asks for more than 1/3 of my income, so I can only choose the 15-year version if my income is at least around $5,000 a month, while I can handle the 30-year loan with as little as $3,600 monthly salary. But to make both of them viable and the math easier, I will consider your monthly income to be $5,000, and for now I will refer to the 15-year option as option A and the 30-year one as option B. In A's case, $1,700 will go to your mortgage, and let's say around $2,000 goes to your essentials, such as your food, your other payments, and your utilities, and so on. As for the remaining $1,300, you will spend on investment and luxuries. You like nice rounded numbers the same way I do, so you will put $1,000 every month towards your investment, which let's say earn you a 5% interest rate. Since you are investing at a higher rate than your loan, 5% over the 4%, investment is probably preferable to you than prepaying your mortgage. With these, let's get into this. In 5 years, you will have $50,000 in down payment, $102,000 you've paid into your mortgage. For that, you got around 1/3 of your house's value, which should be around $83,000. Although you have no clear access to that yet, you built it up. You've already paid for it, so that part is already yours. Your portfolio should be around $68,000 at this point. 10 years into your mortgage, you will have the same amount in down payment. You have paid $204,000 on your mortgage. You now owe 2/3 of your house, which is around $167,000, and your portfolio has reached $156,000 by now. By the end of your mortgage, you paid $356,000 for your house, but now it's fully yours, and if prices did not change, they likely did, hopefully in your favor, especially considering that inflation works for you with longer loans, it's worth $250,000 at least. You also have a portfolio of $269,000 by now. For the sake of a better comparison, let's go a bit further. Let's go until 30 years. But this time you no longer have to pay your mortgage, so you will put another $1,500 towards your savings for this 15 years. You would still have the house worth $250,000, and you would have a portfolio worth around $1,300,000, putting your net worth a bit over $1.5 million by the end of the 30th year. Not bad, considering we lived a pretty decent life of a $5,000 monthly salary. That salary may sound a bit large for you, which it is. However, the numbers wouldn't change much if you consider that as the result of two people's salary. You could still make it work, although quite obviously your life would be a bit more tight in that case, but it's still doable. Now let's go over to option B, the 30-year case. This time it will be $1,200 for your mortgage. The same $2,000 will go to your essentials, and you invest $1,500 every month, because now you have that extra $500, which you don't have to pay towards your mortgage in this case. In 5 years, this way you pay down $72,000 on your house, which will earn you 1/6 of its value. That's around $42,000, and you will end up with a savings of $102,000. Quite impressive in 5 years. In 10 years, you paid almost $200,000 on your house, and you owe 1/3 of it, which is around, again, $83,000, and have a portfolio which is worth over $200,000 at this point. Which is pretty good, because if you consider to have a $200,000 worth of investment portfolio, then chances are that portfolio alone from now on can easily finance the rest of your house. So at that point, you could switch over to just not paying your mortgage from your salary at this point, but just let your investment take care of it. Just a consideration. But let's go with it as we have. In 15 years, you paid off $266,000, which makes you owe half of the house, which is around $125,000, and your investments grew over $400,000 at this point. Finally, at the end of the 30-year period, you have paid off everything, your mortgage completely. You've ended up paying $482,000 on your house, which is worth $250,000. Again, probably more. And you have a savings account which is worth over $1.25 million at this point, putting your net worth to an overall amount of, again, a bit over $1.5 million. This has some interesting implications. The better return you can generate on your investments, the better the 30-year mortgage will become for you. It also shows that if you don't make that much on your investments, then a 15-year mortgage can become a pretty viable option for you. However, I would preface that that's only the case if you can get the 15-year mortgage at the same interest rate, or very close to the same interest rate as you can get the 30-year mortgage. In reality, that will hardly ever be the case. A 30-year mortgage will almost always have a lower interest rate, making it the better choice in almost all scenarios. In reality, the difference would be even larger. Remember that we have to calculate inflation into this, since we are talking about a 30-year period after all. And the longer your investment is going on, the longer your mortgage payment is going on, the more inflation is working for you, making the amount you have to pay worth less and less. So that too, inflation in this case will help you, and it will make the 30-year mortgage a much more attractive case to begin with. It will also allow you to buy a bigger house if you use my 1/3 of your income rule, because since it will cost less, it will allow you to just buy a bigger, more expensive house with the same salary. Using this, however, will cut into your savings, so that's just something to consider. Now that we looked at buying, let's rent for a change. This is where the calculations become a bit harder, because the amount people rent out their places at can differ wildly depending on the area and just the prices in general. But let's say that for the house we talked about previously, it would rent out at around $800 a month, all the way up to like $1,500 a month. In general, you can do a basic calculation to check whether renting is worth it or not for you. For this, you will need to take the expected value of the flat or house, divide it by the yearly rent that they ask of you, and you will get a number. If this number is 1 to 15, then it's a really bad deal for you, probably not worth taking. If it's between 16 and 20, then it's considerable, depends on your other circumstances. If it's 21 and above, then it's a great deal. Renting is probably worth it. I'll go fast into these differences with an example for each, by taking free renting prices as an example. For our first example, let's pick the price of, let's say, $1,500 every month. This is around a 14 on our test, so we expect this to be a bad deal. You do not, however, need the $15,000 down payment. You will, however, most likely need an extra month's rent. So if you start from the same financial situation as in our previous example, where we bought, you can start with an initial investment of $48,500. With your current budget, you will be able to invest $1,200 every month while having the same lifestyle as in the previous examples. With rent, the only thing that generates you value will be your investment, so we will only need to track that. In 5 years, your portfolio will be worth around $144,000. In 10 years, $267,000. In 15 years, $426,000. And your 30-year net worth will be $1,230,000. Almost 20% lower than if you had bought the house instead. With price 2, I picked a very arbitrary number, let's say $1,150 a month. This corresponds to around an 18 on our test, which makes it debatable. So let's see what we get. Same investment plan as before, but now we have $1,550 every month to add to our portfolio. In 5 years, this way we will have a portfolio worth around $169,000. In 10 years, $323,000. In 15 years, over $500,000. And our 30-year net worth will be over $1.5 million, which is, as we expected, about the same as our net worth would be if we had bought a house. As for price 3, I picked $950 every month. This is a 22, a great deal on our little test. This way you can put $1,750 every month towards your savings, giving you $183,000 in 5 years, $355,000 in 10 years, $576,000 in 15 years, and by the end of the 30-year period, you will have $1,695,000 invested, which is around a 12% better yield than if you had just bought your house. In conclusion, as for the economical side is concerned, whether you should rent or buy really comes down to two things. One, how good of a renting price you can get compared to the value of the home. Remember the 1 to 15, bad deal, 16 to 20, debatable, and 21 plus, good deal, probably worth to rent the place. 2, how good of an investor you are. The better your investment success, the more you can generate through your investments, the more renting becomes more economically viable. Again, you should always consider the psychological, the locational, and other aspects of renting or buying first, and only then should you go into the full calculation mode and make the final decision. If you're someone who just really don't feel like investing, hopefully in my upcoming videos and so on throughout the series I will convince you otherwise, but if you really don't feel like putting energy towards investing or ever investing yourself, then I would pretty much always advise just buying a home and using the excess cash or money you have towards prepayment and just getting rid of your mortgage as fast as possible, because by doing so you are basically investing, but in a way that requires far less effort from you. So that's an option for you as well. In the next video, I will be talking about cash and when it's worth to keep it, when it's worth to just spend it, and how you should handle it in general. Until then, see you guys, take care, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.